The Treveri residing in the Moselle region were like other Gallic tribes caught up in Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul. And the arrival of the Romans triggered a power struggle among their tribal leaders who could not agree on whether to side with Caesar or to fight him. A power struggle that was ultimately decided on the battlefield in confrontations with the Roman legions. Now, this story comes entirely from Julius Caesar's own accounts of the Gallic Wars. And despite the often self-serving tone of his narrative, it does breathe life into some of these Celtic characters in a way that archaeology cannot do. My name is Christian, and you're watching episode 4 of Romans on the Moselle. In the year 58 BCE, following his one-year stint as consul, Julius Caesar was appointed proconsul of Rome's two northern provinces, Cisalpine Gaul in northern Italy and Transalpine Gaul in what is today southern France. And this assignment would be the springboard for Caesar to ultimately conquer all of Gaul, a task that would take him 8 years to complete. Caesar exploited Gallic infighting and mutual suspicion to Roman advantage. This meant using the carrot as much as the stick, occasionally resorting to brutal atrocities against those who resisted, while at other times treating the conquered generously and helping Roman allies against their own intertribal enemies. The objective was not to leave Gaul a wasteland, but to turn these tribes into productive, tax-paying members of new Roman provinces. As Caesar mentions, the Gauls could put up fierce resistance against the Romans. For sure, they did not want to be ruled by the Romans, nor enslaved. But they could also be opportunistic, as were the Treveri. When we first encounter the Treveri in Caesar's accounts, in 57 BCE, they had sent their renowned cavalry to aid the Romans against common enemies. The Belgic Nervi had formed a confederation of resistance in northern Gaul, while also posing a threat to the Treveri homelands. But when the Treveri warriors heard that the Nervi had succeeded in taking Caesar's camp on the Sabis River, they panicked, believing that Caesar's cause was lost. So they simply went home. Only after they had left was Caesar reinforced by additional legions that helped him defeat the Nervi. Opportunism is symptomatic of the Treveri throughout Caesar's narrative. Like the rest of the Gauls, they were never quite sure how successful Caesar would be, and so they adapted their stance towards the Romans accordingly. That early incident with the runaway Treveri cavalry illustrated to Caesar their wavering loyalty, and so the next summer he sent his capable legate Titus Labienus to lean on them a bit, while Caesar himself was busy pacifying the Atlantic tribes of the Gallic northwest. And then we don't hear much of the Treveri for a couple of years. But in 54, trouble was brewing on the Moselle. In Caesar's own words, "The Treveri had not come to meetings and did not submit to his authority and were said to be stirring up the Germans across the Rhine." This time, Caesar decided to deal with them himself. Rather miffed at having to take a break from his preparations to invade Britain, he headed east with 4 lightly equipped legions and some cavalry to straighten the Treveri out. Indeed, that Caesar took this threat so seriously is testimony to the strength of their tribe, which he described as that having by far the greatest number of cavalry in all of Gaul, and a large force of infantry. And the location of their lands was strategically important, since it bordered the Rhine River and the Germans on the other side. Caesar set up camp somewhere near the western border of the Treveri lands, We don't know exactly where, but it is reasonable to assume that he would select a defendable hill near the Meuse River, which was the border between the lands of the Treveri and those of their western neighbors, the Roman-friendly Remi. I visited a hill in this area that fits this description, overlooking the French town of Verdun. But its sad, scarred landscape bears witness to a very different conflict from a very different age. Anyway, when the Treveri tribal leaders heard that Caesar was on his way, they jumped up on their horses, riding out a good day's journey west to meet up with Caesar at his camp somewhere on the border. Their leader was called Cingetorix, not to be confused with the more famous Vercingetorix that Caesar would meet a couple of years later. Cingetorix declared his tribe's assistance and undying loyalty to Rome. And he also took the opportunity to provide Caesar with an update on what was going on with the Treveri people.
Most importantly, Caesar now learned that Cingetorix was not the unrivaled leader of the tribe. He was challenged by Indutiomarus, his own father-in-law, who'd stayed back in Treveri lands, preparing for war with the Romans, and he'd sent all the women and children to hide deep in the Ardennes forest. But when Indutiomarus heard that many other Treveri leading men had also pledged their loyalty to Caesar, he feared he was being deserted by everyone. So he had to at least put up a pretense of loyalty to Rome too. He didn't really want to go and see Caesar, so he sent a messenger explaining that Indutiomarus would like to come and see you, but the people back home might rebel if left without leadership. Well, Caesar did not accept this. He simply ordered Indutiomarus to come and see him and bring 200 hostages, including his own son and all his male relatives, whom Caesar mentioned by name. Presumably he got this list of names from Cingetorix. But he still didn't trust Indutiomarus. So he also called up all the other leading Treveri men individually and advised them to accept Cingetorix's de facto leadership of the Treveri tribe. And with that, because they did, Caesar was satisfied. And he went back west to continue with his preparation for invading Britain. But Indutiomarus, he realized that Caesar's intervention had completely undermined his position with the tribe, and his resentment towards the Romans intensified.
He would not wait long to act on his frustration. Already that same winter of 54-53, when Caesar's legions were no longer in the vicinity, Indutiomarus began organizing a wider Gallic resistance to the Romans, forming a coalition of the willing among the Treveri warriors, along with several other tribes, and he offered rewards to exiles and condemned persons throughout Gaul. He gathered the chieftains to a war convention, where he also declared his opponent, Cingetorix, enemy of the state, for his loyalty to Rome. He left Cingetorix alive, but confiscated his goods. And so the charismatic Indutiomarus secured himself great authority in Gaul. Now deputations hastened to him from every direction, seeking favor and friendship. Also the Nervi and the Aduatuci tribes began preparing for war against the Romans. The immediate western neighbors of the Treveri, however, the Remi, remained friends with Rome. Indutiomarus was not having it. At the top of his agenda was to march through Remi territory and lay waste to their lands, starting with an attack on the Roman camp that was based there. But this would turn out to be Indutiomarus' undoing. The camp was under the command of no other than Titus Labienus, Caesar's formidable right-hand man. Indutiomarus began harassing Labienus' camp, hoping to lure the Romans' meager troops into a trap across the river. But he didn't know that Labienus was actually hiding a huge cavalry inside the camp. At the right moment, when the Treveri rebels were leisurely returning home, Labienus sent his cavalry after them. And on his instructions, they went straight for the Gallic leader himself, catching up with him as he was crossing the river. They cut off his head and brought it back to the Roman commander.
But even with Indutiomarus gone, his relatives marshaled the Treveri for a renewed fight against the Romans the following year, again teaming up with the Nervii, the Aduatuci, and the Menapii tribes. Even a bunch of Germans over by the Rhine joined in. But again they would be defeated by Labienus and his one legion. The Treveri acted hastily. They knew that Caesar was on his way with 2 more legions to assist Labienus, so they attacked before the German allies had time to arrive. Well, as it turned out, Labienus tricked them. He had ordered his troops to break camp noisily to give the impression they were panicking. But at the right moment, the Romans turned around and overwhelmed the Gallic warriors. When the German allies heard of this rout, they turned around and went home. And this time, the kinsfolk of Indutiomarus followed the Germans out of the state, not to return. And with that, the leadership of the Treveri tribe was handed back to Cingetorix, who'd remained loyal to Rome all along.
While the Treveri were now effectively out of the contest, Caesar's greatest Gallic challenger would come from further south. Vercingetorix, still today a French national hero, the chieftain of the Arverni tribe, managed in 52 BCE to unite almost all the Gauls in a great uprising against the Romans. I say almost all because a handful of tribes did not sign up, and one of these was the Treveri. Caesar just provides a very brief explanation for their absence. Because they were too far distant and were hard pressed by the Germans. Well, as we know, Vercingetorix and his Gallic forces were ultimately defeated at the siege of Alesia, bringing an end to coordinated Gallic resistance. But even after this, we hear from Caesar that the Treveri would rebel one more time against the Romans, but with no greater success than previously. Caesar observes that many Treveri warriors were killed. I would like to make one observation here. We don't know where all these battles against the Treveri took place. What we can say, however, is that they did not occur at their main oppidum hill fort at Titelberg, which we covered in the previous episode. The oppidum actually survived the Gallic wars pretty much intact. Archaeology shows no signs of battle damage during this period. And so, by 49 BCE, the Gallic wars were finally over. Caesar's political enemies back in Rome were stirring up trouble. He crossed the Rubicon, entering Italy proper with his troops, and so triggered a wave of Roman civil wars that would not be finally concluded until 20 years later, with Octavian's victory over Mark Antony at Actium. During this tumultuous period, the Romans could only afford to devote but a bare minimum of attention to Gaul. Yet despite this scarcity of Roman presence, these new territories benefited from a period of peace and prosperity. In the lands of the Treveri, the Romans retained a moderate contingent of soldiers to ensure the peace. In any case, the scope for stirring up a rebellion had been tempered by the severe culling of Gallic warrior ranks as a result of their fight with the Romans. And many of those that were left standing were now being recruited into the Roman army. Subjugated chieftains were recruited as officers of the auxiliary forces. One famous representation of such a Gallo-Roman warrior from around this time is this statue, known as the Vacher warrior from southern Gaul. He almost looks like a regular Roman warrior, except he wears a Celtic torque around his neck and carries a Celtic-style shield. Meanwhile, at Titelberg, the civilian Roman emporium mentioned last time was now expanded into a supply base for the Roman military. Artisans manufactured weapons and other equipment for the troops. The oppidum achieved its greatest economic boom in these decades just after the conquest, now that Gallic intertribal warfare had finally been suppressed. Peace facilitated a flourishing of crafts and trade between the different Gallic tribes. Thousands of Celtic coins from over 30 different peoples of Gaul have been uncovered at Titelberg from this period. And so long as the Celtic elites remained loyal to Rome, they could maintain their aristocratic lifestyle.
Until now, the Romans had not been able to attend much to the administration of Gaul because of their own civil war. But with Octavian, the unchallenged ruler of the empire, this changed quickly. Octavian and his friend, Marcus Agrippa, launched an ambitious transformation of the Roman administration of Gaul, building new road networks and imposing a census to tax the population. The process of Romanizing the Treveri was slow at first, but it gained momentum in the Augustan era. Now Roman coins became more widely used. Food habits and tableware changed. Livestock was renewed through the import of larger Roman breeds. Gallic building techniques gave way to Roman ones, wood transitioning to stone foundations. And those Celtic burial rituals, they began to fade, being replaced by Mediterranean stone stelae. And the tribal leadership of the Treveri, they relocated to their new Roman capital city, Augusta Treverorum, a city we know today as Trier.